Hello, welcome to another episode of the Panachecast. You'll recall from previous weeks that we've mentioned we're going to get some expertise in on legal project management as part of our series. We're hoping to bring to everybody a bit more information about law firm economics and so on. And pricing is a big part of that, and we've covered some scope. But the expertise of pricing is not with Pete and I, so we've brought in our expert now, Robert Mowbray, who many of the viewers will know. You've probably had training from Robert at some point in the past, but Robert, do you want to... Thanks for coming, first of all, but do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm a sad accountant. You've all met loads of sad accountants before, but I'm the saddest in the legal sector.
It's the saddest.
Because all I've done for 30 years is visit law firms on a daily basis of all sizes all over the world. And the key thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that I never have responsibility or authority. I can never tell people what to do. So as I get older and have more grey hairs, the challenge is to just challenge everything. And just
that's the best situation to be in as well, isn't it?
Think again, because at the end of the day, I walk away and go home with nothing to worry about. And if people choose to ignore it, it's fine. If people think there's some merit in what I'm saying, it's great.
Good. Well, let's hope they're doing some listening, because there's not much point in you being there if they're not going to pay attention to what you're telling them. So tell us a little bit about your background, your introduction into your legal expertise, your background to you, and how you got into it.
All right, so everyone's got a little story. My little story is I was an accountant, didn't know what I was going to do with my career, and then a law firm phoned me up and said, could you just come and explain a set of accounts to a room full of lawyers? So I did it, thought nothing of it. They liked it, word spread. Quickly I was doing this sort of work with lots of firms, and then one of the firms said, could you now explain our accounts to the partners, because they just don't understand their business. Yeah. So I did it, and then 30 years later I visited firms all over the place. I'm seen as an expert in law firm finance and profitability. I've probably spent more time thinking about it than anyone on the planet, but whether I know more, I don't know. So
good. And you started off with a contact, presumably, and it's grown from there. How many firms have you spoken to over the years, do you think?
I stopped counting at 1,000, okay. But I'm well over 1,000. But I'm seen as someone who's worked primarily with big firms, and early on I was lucky. I got in with big firms and globalisation and learned a lot by working with those sophisticated firms. But as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, they think they don't need external input, even though maybe they do. So you just start working with slightly smaller firms. So I've worked with a complete range, and some of the firms that impress me most are tiny little one-partner firms, but really efficient and well organised.
Do you find the same kind of things apply across the board in a lot of areas?
The principles are the same. If you're going to make money out of the law, you've got to be efficient at what you do.
Whether you're...
The trouble actually for a big firm is you'll never get everybody working perfectly at the same time. In a little firm you could do. So the most profitable firms will be little niche firms, not big firms.
Yeah, I've wondered whether that may be the larger firms sometimes struggle with the profitability because each individual partner or group or practice is actually running its own business, and sometimes there's a bit of a conflict between how those departments can work.
Yeah, and a bit of complacency, and they're a bit detached from the business. They're just practicing the law.
Yes.
But because the firm has always been profitable, they assume money will continue to fall from the sky. And then every now and then a large firm fails.
Yes.
It's about every 2 years a large firm fails, and then people go, well, maybe we do need to do the right things.
Yes, and there's always shock. So is that when you're at your busiest then, is when a big failure comes along and people think we better do it?
Normally they've gone bust. They want other help at that point.
I mean all the other firms,
I wish they'd phoned me up before they went bust, and then I'd like to have thought I could have helped them.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's okay. So that's interesting. That leads us really into how you can help people. What does your range of expertise cover? What do your materials cover?
I'm seen as a trainer, primarily, which is probably accurate, but people will phone up and say, we have this business issue, so can you come and train people? And I'll always say, I can come and train them, but what's your procedure around this thing? And then they say, what do you mean procedure? Yeah. So, for example, I might help people to time record better. And the basis point is a time recording policy, but most firms don't have one. Yeah. So when I'm asked to go and do time recording training, the starting point might be to agree on a policy and then to train people around it. Okay, if someone phones up and says, can you come and help us with pricing because we're rubbish at it? I'll say, well, yeah, but what's the policy around pricing? And people just look confused.
That's why we're rubbish at it, we don't know.
What do you mean policy? And I'll say things like, well, can anyone on the planet phone any one of your lawyers up today and ask for a quote? And they say, well, yeah, that's how it works, isn't it? I say, yeah, so you've got no procedure at all. Surely there should be a smaller number of people who are more able, who should be giving the quotes in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's quite a big shift for a lot of firms.
One would think that would be a partner of some sort who's going to commit the firm to doing work at a certain price, but not always, presumably.
Yeah, no, very, very junior people commit firms to huge bits of work at very low prices.
Yes, inexperience might not be such a great thing in those circumstances. Yeah. So the beginnings then are presumably the time recording. That's where everything starts, and that's what lawyers have been doing for quite a long time. Any change in that coming on that you see?
The natural flow for me helping a firm is the quickest way to make more money is just get people to record their time better, because we've now got more to show the client and we're probably going to bill more. Yeah. So that's a good starting point. But the other benefit of the time recording is we can now see how long it actually takes to do things. Yeah. And in today's world, we're pulling our hair out going, well, no one's ever going to pay for that long. And that then gets into efficiency. So there's time recording, which does help with billing, but it also gets into efficiency and project management.
Yeah.
If you can't get any more efficient, the only other way of making more money is by charging more. So I see it as there's time recording, there's efficiency, there's pricing, there's fee negotiation. The other side of it, which lawyers are rubbish at, is they just focus on the profit and they don't think about the cash flow. Yeah. And you can be making a lot of profit by doing a lot of work and getting a lot of bills out, but you go bust if you don't collect the bill. So huge issue in the profession is lack of cash. If they had the cash, they could invest earlier and they'd be more robust because they've got money when a client asks for a discount.
Yeah. Have you found there's been any sort of more recent shift in that as more firms look to do sort of fixed price work and things, or is the time recording still integral, even if it's just internal to the firm?
It is terrifying how many firms are now saying we don't need to record time anymore because the cost is now fixed. It's terrifying how many people are saying that. Yeah, the price is now fixed. The cost of doing the work is still the big variable. You need to understand it. And if you look at the big issues in larger firms, I would say the number one financial issue is scope creep. Because we quote for something that we never end up doing. And to get the work, you tightly scope the job. And then when you do it, it explodes. It could be 10 times bigger, 50 times bigger. And the failure to spot and communicate that is a big problem. And the answer is time recording. People should be recording all their time, but there's got to be some mechanism that we can use to highlight what's outside scope so that the person who's responsible for the file can keep the client updated, and most clients are not intrinsically unfair, provided the communication is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key point, isn't it? If you tell someone too late, it is too late, really. And I like to try and get some analogies in. If you were having a builder in to do some work and then he later told you after he'd done the extra work, well, the work's done, and if you told me at the time, I may have said to do something slightly differently or not to bother at all. And not every client treats every problem in the same way. Some clients will take views on things, other clients may not. So it's very important to have those conversations.
Plus it's worse because a lawyer is typically actually sending a bill for work they did 70 days ago.
Right.
So we do 70 days of work without telling the client. We do work for a client for several months, then we raise a bill. It's so far ago, the clients just say, well, I don't remember that. It's just very difficult.
Difficult to contest it and things.
The recording of the time, there's quite a lot in that. The recording of the time, the discipline of doing that and doing it well, that's one aspect of it. But presumably what comes out at the other end is suppose you're working on a fixed fee job, you're monitoring the efficiency, but are all firms good at going back and looking at where they've spent the time, where they've lost the time? Do you find that firms are...
No. I mean, lawyers are very good at doing the work, and they work flat out to do the work and meet the client's expectation. Where the problems are is there's lack of planning at the beginning, so we should be planning work so we had to have a greater chance of efficiency, and then having done the job, having done it, rather than race on and do the next piece of work, we should just reflect for a few minutes and think about what has that taught me. And again, it's all about, I record the time, there is an efficiency, but I can now see it and now we could fix it. And then next time round, there might be slightly less efficiency, but if I reflect again, I might learn again. And it's just marginal gains. And it's pure profit though.
Do you think that might be a reluctance to do that because of the time it takes to do it? Either it's a painful pill to swallow and you don't really want to know the bad news, or frankly it takes quite a long time because it's not so easy to get the information out to understand where you've lost the time.
I mean, it's a bit of both, but I personally think the big problem is professional people are highly intelligent, and if somebody suggests they're inefficient, they don't like to hear it, and they're not going to accept it. So they'd just rather not have the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like challenging people and saying, I think you're hideously inefficient, even though you've been doing it for 20 years. You may well be way smarter than you were 10 years ago, but you're nowhere near perfect.
Yeah.
And sometimes an external voice saying that is helpful. Whereas if it's someone internally, people just argue and get defensive.
And you mentioned the profitability thing earlier. Profitability and recovery rate, of course, are not the same thing. And sometimes I think people, particularly at the junior end, may struggle to understand quite how the profitability of a law firm works. And I think what you said earlier from the introduction is that not necessarily all the senior people understand how the profitability works either. Can you touch on that for us?
So professional firms are guilty of measuring easily measured things. So they tend to prioritise fee income and hours recorded, which is just talking about volumes of work. And you can have loads of hours and loads of fee, and you could be losing money. So it's relatively recent that people said we need to focus less on volume and more on margin and profit. And the easy thing for a lawyer to measure on profitability is a recovery rate. So what percentage of the time are we actually billing? And it's a proxy for profit, but it's not a good measure because it's different people have different profit margins. A partner can have a very high charge-out rate and be quite an expensive person, so low margin. A senior associate might have a charge-out rate that's only a bit lower, but they could actually cost a lot less. And so a better measure would be gross profit percentage. And if you measure that, you get quite different numbers to information to what recovery rates would show.
And that supposes, I guess, in a perfect world, that everybody knows what the different profitability rates are, and that there is the adequate resource at the highest profitability rates for people to do the work. And I don't suppose that's the case either in a competitive market.
No, the world is not perfect. The really profitable firms where their gross profit margins are good, the other key measure in my mind is a really good partner will always be too busy. So they cannot make more profit because they can't work any harder unless they get better at using a team and leveraging it. And this is why you want to look at gross profit margins, but you also want to look at gross profit per partner hour. So if we look at the gross profit on a job and divide it by the number of hours the partner spent on it, that's basically telling you how good they are at leveraging it. And when you start measuring that in big firms, the variance you see is unbelievably big. Now, not 10, 20, 30% difference, but thousands of times difference in terms of profit per hour. And I just think, once you start looking at that data, it's really telling you about what sort of work should we be doing and what sort of work should we just be steering well clear of, because we're otherwise just a busy fool. And if you start to look at the profitability of individual files, most firms will open several thousand files in a year. Over half are probably loss-making, but they tend to be the smaller ones.
And that kind of stuff is hidden because they don't analyse it.
No, you don't look at it. They're looking at the fee, and every bit of fee is seen as extra profit. The reality is they're losing money on most of it, but on a smaller number of bigger jobs, they're making sizable profit, which is covering a lot of little losses, and they end up making a perfectly decent living. Despite what they're doing.
Despite, if you look at it in detail.
That's difficult, isn't it? Because I imagine a lot of the people are working for clients that will have requirements at a low level, and they won't be profitable, and they may not pay more. But at the same time, you don't want to surrender the big ticket work, and there's a balance in that. But it would help to be efficient in knowing where the line is between loss making.
When you do the big ticket work for a client, are you giving them the right message if you say we also can do the low level stuff? Because are you saying you're really focused on doing the high level stuff? It's confidence, and there is how far you want to push it.
There is that,
and
I think.
If you analyse it, the low level work, it might be loss making, but if you actually analysed it, it could become profitable. You're going to have to do it in a different way to the way you're doing it at the moment. So now I like talking to people about you've got this really profitable stuff. Don't get complacent. You can make that way more profitable. And then the stuff at the other end where there's lots of it and it's unprofitable, you don't have to get rid of it. You could just re-engineer it. But if you don't re-engineer it, you should get rid. Because you don't want to be a busy fool.
No,
you can sit at home and watch daytime television rather than or something like this, rather than being at work losing money, which is what a lot of people are doing without even realising.
Without realising, I was going to say,
How might they go through a re-engineering process? I think probably a lot of people are just stuck in the quagmire of just churning out the work and as you said earlier, too busy to think about it and stop thinking about it, or or too frightened, frankly, of the reality to stop and look at it. How can they do that?
So, if I'm training people in a classroom, I would typically start a session by saying to people, right, just write down, if I phoned you up today and asked you to do your normal sort of thing, just write down the process you would go through to do it. And it sounds like a stupid question, because it's just, I know I've been doing this for years, so they write something down. And then I say to them, do you want to compare with your next door neighbour and see if you've got any differences in your process, even though they're doing different types of law, but they learn a lot by doing that, because there's some things they're not doing, or there's stuff they're doing that actually they don't need to do. And then you start talking about what really smart people do, and at each stage you say, was that on your checklist? And they go, no. And at the end, they're crossing certain things out, which they now see are completely redundant, and they're adding in other things, particularly at the beginning and the end, which would make the whole process more efficient. And now they've got a way of doing it differently.
I think we've talked about that before, haven't we? Where we've said different people will approach jobs in a different way. You might get different offices dealing with one piece of work in a different way to another office, and particularly in firms that are multi-sited. I wonder whether the clients expect everything to be delivered in a sort of exactly the same way, a McDonald's approach, if you like.
I've got no doubt big firms that are trying to go global, and there's lots of them. They're trying to build a brand, quite rightly, because with the brand, the customer will pay more for the work. So that's an important thing to do. If you've got hideous inconsistency coming out of every office and every practice group, you're actually dismantling the brand. So we do need more consistency, and we don't want robots, and every single transaction is different, but we can have an awful lot more consistency of approach and efficiency, that we can top and tail a matter so a client feels it's bespoke for them.
You mentioned earlier then that some people take the advice and some people don't. Have you got any good stories and maybe some examples of firms that have said to you, look, we're not quite sure what the problem is, we maybe need to re-engineer the way we're doing it, and they've listened to what you've said, and what's the general outcome for them at the end when they...
I can give, without naming names, I'll give you examples of the sort of things that firms have done. So if you want to get more efficient in doing a piece of work, the lawyer thinks they're already perfect. So if I'm challenging them, I'd say, well, you could delegate to a colleague. And then they start saying, but if I delegate to a colleague, they'll take longer, and even if they're cheaper, it's going to cost more. So you then start saying, so why do you think it goes wrong? And you get them to work out, actually, it's because, they're quite efficient, but when they delegate to a cheaper person, they don't share with them the relevant knowledge. So, the specimen document, the process you would go through. But if you spent a bit longer delegating properly, actually it would come back really good and much cheaper. And then when they're going, but I think I've now mastered delegation, what do I do next? I'll say, well, you just got to learn to think more laterally. So instead of delegating internally, you delegate externally, like to a client. Because we get this permanent pushback on fee. They want the price to come down. Well, I can get the cost down by me not doing the work but get the client to do it. And in my mind, the obvious things to get the client to do, without there being any dilution in quality of service, is upfront information gathering and admin. Because nobody wants to pay my hourly rate for information gathering and admin. So I've had a lot of success with individual lawyers who've actually, as a result of talking to them, the big thing they've done is they've gone away and written a much better first email to send to a client when they get an instruction. So the first email says, thanks for coming to see us, we can definitely help you, we do this all the time, but if I'm going to meet your expectation on price and deadline, what I need from you is as follows. And it's a really clear template for the client to fill in. And if everything comes back perfectly formatted, everybody wins. It's done efficiently, it's done to budget, and the lawyer makes money. But if you're constantly chasing, the cost just goes through the roof, the client's getting nothing extra, you suffer. And associates and firms tell me, you get that first email right, you can knock 10, 20, 30, 40% off the cost of a job. That's completely changing profitability.
I mean, we've spoken previously about when you're looking at the work you do and looking at where you could reduce costs and things like that, rather than, just flatly reducing your price. It's that kind of, well, as part of this bundle, we will do this. If you want the cost reduced, we'll take stuff out of that we do, rather than just reduce the cost. And in that situation, you're right, you're offloading some work to the client, say, well, we won't charge you for that then, but it makes the whole process better for you and speeds up.
If you want one last example of efficiency, I personally think the fastest way to become really efficient is to properly benchmark your way of doing something against other lawyers. And the other lawyers could work in your firm, they could work in other firms, but we think we're perfect. I mean, we're not, but we think we are.
Yeah.
If you force yourself to compare against someone else, you can see the differences, and we can both benefit from it. Because I'm probably doing some things more efficiently than you, and you're doing some things more efficiently than me. And now we're building that brand and consistency, and we know we can go in offering fixed fees at a certain price and definitely make money on it.
Yeah.
Whereas no one wants to offer the fixed fee because they're not certain they'll be able to deliver efficiently.
Yeah.
Do you find there is that appetite within firms to share that kind of information amongst themselves, or is that they don't like discussing with other firms what they're doing and how they do things?
I think individual firms, especially if they're big, they start worrying about competition type issues. Because we're creating a cartel.
Yeah.
But I'd say wherever you work, an individual lawyer will have mates who do similar work in other firms.
In other firms.
And on a no names basis, just to have a chat
Just have a
about
casual
how do you
conversation.
approach something.
Yeah.
And as firms get bigger and more international, if a lawyer in London benchmarks against a lawyer in Frankfurt, there may be legal differences, which mean the process is going to be slightly different anyway, but there's still core processes and how do we do things that we can learn really quickly from. So rather than take 20 years to work it out, just talk to the millions of years experience that exists on the planet, and let's see if we can learn from it.
Yeah. Well, you touched on an interesting point there about the international stuff. Do you find then that different nations and cultures operate significantly differently? And if so, are there any that are particularly good or particularly bad?
You definitely see in the legal sector different cultural things. But in each major country, you get such varied practice anyway. Within a country, there's huge variation. But the example I first saw was around time recording, because in the US, lawyers sort of get you need to record everything to understand the cost. So culturally, they just record it. Whereas the rest of the world starts worrying about putting it down because of the consequence on the recovery rate. And so they start under recording. So there are differences.
I recall that being one of the. I mean, the one thing that's stuck in my mind about when I've attended your sessions before is don't edit the time before you've put it down. The time to do that is at the end, or toward the end, before you want to talk to the client before you write the time off. But don't write the time off before you've recorded it by putting it down as admin or miscellaneous or something. If you're putting it on the file with an appropriate note,
it's part of the cost of the job. Put it on the file, but you're now raising the other key thing, which is describe it in language that the client would see value in. So there's simple examples like if you're travelling to a meeting, it's part of the cost of doing the job. You put the time down, but if you call it travel, any client is going to say, do I really have to pay for this? Because they don't see value. But if I put it down as preparation for and travel to, because there's an element of preparation, now the client's going, it's probably got some value. I mean, if I was to actually have a laugh and put it down as saving you the bother of travelling, it's even more value. So
interesting.
Or admin tasks.
I was going to say, just putting down admin as
I spend 20 minutes at the end of a busy day putting papers away on a file. It's part of the cost of the job. The time should definitely be on the file because I want to understand what things cost. But if I call it filing, and I'm charging several £100s an hour, a client will push back on it. So I've got to think about a positive, accurate description. So something like reviewing and updating the file is probably a better way of describing that. I'd be the first to say a client might not pay full whack for that, but they'll probably give me some credit. But if you don't put it down, or you put it down with a negative description, you get nothing, and you probably wind the client up.
That's interesting. I mean, we obviously we're dealing with technology issues ourselves, and part of the battle and struggle I think that we see is that sometimes firms have time recording which is not necessarily perfectly aligned with their scope. And so some firms might be very good at scoping out jobs. They itemize everything, they say exactly what we're going to do, but necessarily the time recording doesn't fit into that particularly well. Do you come across any technology issues, solutions that people try to use? Is that generally a problem?
I mean, spotting the out-of-scope stuff traditionally, before technology got better, people would just say, we'll set a fee estimate up on a file when we open it, and when the WIP gets to a certain percentage of that, the fee earner will get an alert. So before we get to the limit, you better go and talk to the client. The big problem was these things tend to default to 75-80%. Well, if I've already got 75 to 80% and we're now only 20% through, it's a bit late to be talking to the client. Now I think those systems are still good, but you probably want the alert earlier, because By the time I spent 20% of the budget, I now have a feel for whether the estimate is right or not, and the earlier I go back, the better. I mean, now as technology gets better, that there's clearly technology out there that means people can set budgets by phases and tasks and record time against it. But you've got to understand you may go outside a scope, so we need to have some way of recording that. Or the way I've always advocated is you might not have technology that's that sophisticated, but if you're just recording time on a file, if there's a way of marking time that's outside a scope, so people can quickly see it with some sort of note, and that's what most firms, bigger firms, are doing. They're saying definitely put the time down, but there's some sort of note facility against the time entry.
Okay, that makes it easier for them to see then. Okay, that's interesting. There's a big uptake in that. I suppose, I mean, for me, if you, for example, a big corporate job, which might involve the corporate team, but then you've got maybe litigators looking at certain bits and employment lawyers and real estate lawyers, etc. It's easy then for all that time to just get piled into one big mass. Are firms generally able to separate that out and look at the scope properly? And in your experience,
depends on how much planning time there is at the beginning. If there's no planning, you probably just have a file open and all the time is dumped in one place, and then subsequent analysis becomes harder. But if when you open the file you plan the job and you have a proper plan and a scope of work, now maybe we can record time against that. And with better technology that is now definitely possible.
And do you see clients now embracing that technology, and do you find them getting significant gains from that kind of thing, or is it still it can be a nice to have in places, but it's not the key.
I don't spend an awful lot of time talking to the client, so I hear secondhand from the lawyer whether the client is happy or unhappy. But clients don't like nasty shocks and surprises. So I think what clients would like is to have direct access, into the work in progress all the time, and there are firms now that will give that to certain clients. But I think that's client driven, and if we look ahead 10-20 years, I think that might be the norm. It'll probably take longer, but that's the way I think we're going.
And I imagine there's a fear in firms of opening up that kind of information to the clients, but if it's it's happening, they're asking for that information, you're going to have to do it. And I guess it comes down to how much you share with them, and as you say beforehand, how you label things on there as well.
Bigger buyers of legal services are already using big panels. They know, because they're getting printouts for each of those firms, of how many hours people are spending on particular files, and they're working out which firms are actually more efficient than others. And the information is out there. Whether people choose to look at it and analyse it is another issue.
I think it can be frightening for the lawyer, because then there's an expectation that you're always on and you're always looking at things, and you're just expected, I think, to push things along a little bit more quickly. But I think that's just a fact of life. I mean, if you want to order a pizza nowadays, Domino's will tell you exactly where it is, and they might get lost delivering it, but at least you know it's on its way. And I don't see any reason why that sort of client information and update and engagement wouldn't work its way through to every other industry. Presumably it's already in automotive and so on.
I haven't got precise stats on it, but my understanding is if you go and talk to the regulator, the SRA, they still say one of the most common complaints is failure to keep the client informed on costs. So it would appear we're not at meeting the client's expectation. We're no better at it than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Now, we may be getting better, but the client's expectation is rising as well. Are we keeping pace with that? And a client looks at it and just says, you've done this sort of job many times before, you ought to be able to keep me informed. And they don't understand that actually these jobs do change shape, but it's our job to manage that and manage the client's expectation, not we've got to wait for them to phone up and then deal with it. We should be proactively dealing with it.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it, that you want to begin showing this stuff to clients, and you have to decide, is that now, how do we go about doing that kind of thing? Is that going to be a large investment for us to invest in new technology to do that kind of thing, or is this something that actually we just need to change our in-house practices to be better at recording this stuff, and just find with up-to-date email conversation with the client, just to let them know how it's going rather than wait for them to give you a call. Just keep them updated to stop them hassling you.
I would give the example, I quote £10,000 to a client. If when I come to bill there's £300,000 of time on the clock and I send them the printout, they're thinking, God, he's inefficient. So I wouldn't want them to see it. But that's pretty unusual. If I've quoted £10,000 and at the end there's £12,000 on the clock, even if I feel I can only still charge them 10,000, I'd like them to see the 12,000 because they might feel a bit guilty about the next job.
Yeah.
And we might actually have a grown-up conversation about how could this work better for both of us.
Yeah.
Because you'd like the fee to be 9,500 next time, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to have to write off so much time. So then we get into, could you do a bit more of the upfront information, and could we stick to the timetable a bit better, because if we don't, we get more cost on the file, etc.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the customers and the clients are receptive to that, because it has to be a two-way thing, doesn't it? They ought not to expect the law firms and the lawyers to do the work at a loss and to write off too much time, because that's not in it. There's nothing in it for them to do that, and there's a disincentive then to work well with them in the future.
It's slightly separate, but I've been in a room today with a load of big buyers of legal services, and when you talk to them about how the legal sector works, they were going, we'd happily negotiate with these people and come up with something that's win-win. So, for example, if you would just knock a little bit off your price, I'd happily pay you much earlier.
Right.
Because the client may have a lot of money and they'd like to get a turn on it. Law firms are normally cash poor and they're desperate for the money.
Yeah.
So let's just have some grown-up thinking. I'd happily give you that little discount if you pay me now.
Yeah. I'm sure people who are watching hopefully will be very interested in that room of people you're talking about. pay up earlier, because that can be one of those big issues.
I actually said to one of them, I said, I wish I could have taped what you've just said to me, because lawyers think there's no way the client would pay me early. And you've just said I'd happily pay early because we've got lots of money. We're actually cash rich. But what we struggle with is the size of the fee. So isn't there some middle ground? I said, well, I think there should be as well. Go and talk to them.
I think sometimes there may be a sort of an inherent legacy issue of billing clients sometimes as you go. I mean, some departments, I think litigation departments in particular, have been traditionally better, I think, at billing as they go along, and that might be because there's more uncertainty of output, there's more uncertainty of how things are just going to progress generally, whereas transactional departments have just tended to bill at the end, because that's when the cash is in. And great if they get the cash and they say, well, we'll deduct our payment from what we send to you. But even sometimes that doesn't happen, and some clients will say, send us all the money, send us your bill, and then we'll pay you in our 90-day payment term or something. That's less good.
Well, at the extreme, the transaction never finishes. The law firm carries on incurring expenses and goes bust because it never gets paid.
Well, I hope that doesn't happen too often.
Not too often, anyway.
So firms that are coming to you then that have no particular strategy, I mean, I imagine they are more than we might think, because a bunch of clever people, you'd think they'd all have a strategy in mind. Doesn't sound like they all do. Where should these people start when considering pricing strategy?
I find it interesting. You have a room full of lawyers in a room from different firms, and you say, do you have a time recording policy? They all put their hand up. If you say, do you have an approach to run work efficiently? They all put their hands up. When you go and talk to them in the coffee break individually, you say, so what exactly have you got? They've got nothing.
Right.
So they think, there's a grapevine and everybody understands how things work. It's not.
I log my time, so there must be a policy about it somewhere. But,
So I would just go back to any firm and say, so let's look at your core processes and just think about what those processes should be, and let's write them down and let's communicate them to people. So this is the way we want people to behave. And then you've probably got to have some training to get people to do it, because they've got to buy into it and understand why they've been asked to do these things, because they were very comfortable doing things in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
And would you approach things differently for a smaller firm or a larger firm, or do you think the approach is pretty much the same regardless of size?
I think it's great that different firms of different sizes have very different cultures. I think it's good, and I always respect that culture. I don't want to change it unless they want to change it. But I think the principles of being efficient are the same wherever you go. It doesn't matter what sort of work you're doing, it doesn't matter what size of firm, and just because we're improving efficiency doesn't mean you necessarily change culture, big time. It's processes you're changing. And what most people tell me in chaotic firms, with apparently it's a lovely place to work, is it actually not that nice a place to work, because I just don't know what I'm meant to be doing. And they just say, for goodness sake, tell me. And when you talk to trainees in firms who are spending 6 months in various seats, and you talk to managing partners in those firms, managing partners say, we've got structure and process and we're super efficient. I say, just go and talk to the trainees. They'll tell you just how different it is as they move from seat to seat, and how they're giving completely conflicting advice about the firm's approach on things.
Interesting. Those things don't sound like particularly difficult jobs. Writing a time recording policy doesn't sound very hard. I don't know who writes those, but is it just apathy toward doing something which is not chargeable, and so it doesn't get done?
You're making me smile. Writing a time recording policy is an easy job.
Sounds easy.
Well, with a big global firm, when I talked to associates and they said we've got no guidance on time recording, I said, oh, here we go again. So I went and approached management of the firm and said, you need a policy. And they said, what's that? So I had a meeting with half a dozen very senior partners in the firm and gave them some grey area questions and said, we need guidance on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they said, well, where would we get the policy? And I said, well, normal practice in my eyes is this. And I shared it with them. Every single one of them wanted to argue with all the answers because they thought their answer was right. So in fact, firms find it extremely difficult to write a policy because everybody's got their own view about right.
Okay.
And that's actually why I think using a third party is quite helpful because I've seen the policies in lots of firms. I know what's normal. And when a firm is writing a policy, they probably don't want something that's extreme. They want it to know it's in line with practice, but reflective of the peculiarities of this firm. So I've got a policy, I've got some FAQs to go with it, and I wouldn't impose it on anyone, but it's a good template. And you do a couple of training sessions with people and hear what are the issues in this firm, you can tweak it quite easily.
But presumably it ought to be simple because you don't want people to struggle to grapple with the policy and to spend time constantly reading through a very detailed policy.
It should be easy. I've told you why it's harder to do it, but firms will phone me up and say, well, can we just have your policy? And I say, yeah, there you go. It won't actually help you because not many firms have got a policy. I don't know anyone who's compliant with their policy. So some are more compliant with it. But step one is get a policy. Then the harder bit is now get people to comply with it. And when you go to big firms, multi-office, multi-country, it's really hard. And they're all thinking they've got even more diverse approaches at the moment than just lawyers working in the UK. And to actually get everyone to buy into it is seriously difficult. And the idea that the managing partner can ping out an email and say, here's the policy, now comply. Well, the reality is over 90% won't even read it. And even the ones that read it will immediately take issue with something in it and say, so it's nonsense. So they've just resisted it and nothing has happened.
I wonder if the way forward is to make a shining example of the individuals or teams or offices that do really well and incentivize others to meet that expectation.
I find the way you sell these things internally, you get people to behave in the right way is you make them think they're writing the policy. So even though I've got the policy, you don't impose it. You just say to people, here are some grey area questions, what would you do? And then you share with them the good practice in other firms.
It's a sort of framework to build on.
And then they end up saying, no, I'd like to do it like that. And I say, all right, we'll write the policy like that then. Now, you're not manipulating it, you're just helping people to come to the right conclusions. But if they feel they've written the policy, they embrace it. If they feel management, or even worse, someone from outside is now telling us what to do, they resist it massively. And lawyers do like an argument.
Well, many of them certainly do.
Lots of lively discussions with people about what this policy should say.
So that's interesting. That's one sounding easy thing to do. Difficult in practice, but that is one step people ought to do because just a small increment, an increase on the time recording and the time captured means potentially significantly higher profits because there's a fixed cost.
There's no extra cost, but you've maybe got more income. Even if you can't get more income, you can now see the real cost of doing a job and you can think about efficiency. So now I always say to people when I talk to them about time recording, I'll guarantee you can record more time without working harder, and I'll guarantee you'll make more money, either by billing more or by becoming a bit more efficient, or for most people a bit of both. And people go, this is easy, isn't it? Yeah, it is. You don't need to work hard, you don't need to change anything, you don't need to buy tech or anything like that. You just sort your time recording out and you make loads more money. And now you can afford to invest in things that would make you even more efficient. And it's a virtuous circle.
And what about pricing strategies then for customers? Let's talk to the junior lawyers who are watching, and they get a phone call from the client, like you said. Where do they start and how do they price a job? They know their charge out rate. They have no idea what the profit rate is for themselves. No idea about costs. I mean, presumably, step one is go and talk to your partner and make sure that they know and you have the right conversation. But how do they begin to learn that?
I think the starting point is that they need to know they're going to be put under pressure early on in their career to come up with prices for things where they don't really know the answer. So maybe, again, sit down, have a talk about it in a training environment. But the key thing is the moment they talk to the client's going to talk them down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they want to start higher. And the best way to start higher is before you give your quote, go and talk to a more senior colleague who's done this before. And they'll give you the confidence, start a bit higher and say, this
Yeah.
client might mess you around. The thing might last longer than you thought it was going to last. So why don't you start a bit higher?
It's always easier to come down on price than it is to go up when you're talking to the client.
So that'd be the first bit of advice: is don't blurt out a number, because if you blurt out a number, you're now heading down from there.
Yeah.
So first thing is always take a deep breath and ask the client, would it be all right if I get back to you in a little while? Which normally it's okay as long as it's reasonably quick. And now go and talk to a colleague.
Yeah, and presumably, I mean, if you can explain to a client what you're getting for all this work, what you're getting for this fee, is actually quite significant.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff involved in
So
here.
now I think with a colleague about what's involved, I might actually map out a plan of what's involved. And
Yeah.
if I show the client, they might be going, well, that's quite good value.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just say this will cost you £2,000, they go, what?
Yeah.
Because they can't see any value.
Yeah, I think there's an inherent difficulty there, because sometimes if you price the job based on the component parts of it, we call that bottom-up pricing, and then, or you could just say, well, versus the top-down, which is the client's willing to pay X amount, and how do I squeeze that work into that number? And sometimes you just can't do that.
Right. So if you're doing a low-value piece of work, the logical way to try and price it is on time spent, because it's going to cost you something. But if you're doing something that's really valuable for a client, you still need to think about how long it's going to take you to do, because that's your cost.
Yeah.
You should be trying to get a percentage of the value to the client. And value pricing and value billing, professional firms are not very good at. At its simplest, every professional person has a charge out rate, which they actually see as the ceiling from which they hemorrhage. And how much they hemorrhage depends on how pushy the client is, how much procurement is involved.
Yeah.
Now, I always say to people, you should see your rate, whatever it is, as a starting point for discussion. And there will definitely be times when you have to offer some sort of discount to get lower value work.
Yeah.
But there are definitely going to be times when a client walks through the door with something that's really important to them.
Yeah.
And if you quote your headline rate, they'll actually be thinking, that's a bit cheap, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are you any good? So in those situations, you should be putting a premium on with confidence. And it's pure profit.
Yeah.
And you make loads of money, and that would offset your losses on the smaller side.
On the smaller stuff.
Yeah. Not be afraid to stand your ground.
So there isn't a ceiling.
Yeah.
There's a starting point for discussion.
Yeah.
Do firms come to you with any questions of, well, how on earth are we going to price a job like this? Suppose they're building a power station or something, and who knows what's going to be involved in that? And frankly, there will inevitably be scope creep in something like that, because you'll be digging up ground and not realising what's there or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you stop that?
However they're going to quote, there are genuine caveats that you could put on it, so which are designed to help the client and also help the firm. If you have a one-sided caveat that protects the firm but damages the client's not going to like it. And the obvious caveats are things like, my quote is subject to you giving us all the information which I've asked for by this date.
Yeah.
Because I could be hijacked at the beginning, but because the client lets me down, and this thing will finish by that date.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't, because we now find there's other issues, it's clearly going to cost more and take longer.
Yeah.
But as long as I keep talking to the clients, we get close to the deadline, and they know we're now going on to time spent, not this fixed fee we've agreed.
Yeah.
Clients are not fundamentally unfair, so there are ways of handling it.
Yeah.
I think the other massive thing around pricing is when lawyers are asked to quote, they give a quote, which is the worst thing you can do, because if you give a quote, the client will now immediately go and talk to 2 other firms, and you might not hear from them again.
Yeah.
So you should give them choice.
Yeah.
So we should have at least 3 different ways of quoting for every piece of work.
Yeah.
Now, why would they phone 2 other firms and they'll just pick one?
Okay.
So if you give a quote, they'll benchmark against other firms, and if they come back, now they start negotiating down. So options is...
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that's something that's been employed in a lot of other things, isn't it? Technology, the classic example. And do you want the gold, silver, or bronze? Or do you want the semi version, the enterprise version, or the whatever?
Yeah.
It's common practice elsewhere. We don't seem to have quite learned in the same way.
Well, again, I just find it so funny. You talk to lawyers about how supermarkets do it with 3 prices, and they don't go bronze, silver, gold. They have basic, standard, finest.
Yeah.
You put a slide up on a training session and say you could offer basic, standard, finest. Lawyers look horrified.
Yeah.
We only have a premium offering.
Yeah.
Which is why I say, so let's just change the words for lawyers. And I think lawyers should use words of good, better, best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most clients expect a better service. That's what we normally do. This is
Yes.
what it looks like.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
your budget's tight, we've got a perfectly good offer.
Yeah, we've still got a good offering
Yeah.
for it. It's
It's perfectly okay. If you want the best, we can do it. It does come at this
Yeah.
higher price, but you get these extra things to
Yeah.
do with service.
And that, yeah, that, I
There's
mean, that,
confidence around that.
that presumably, that gets into a whole conversation of KPIs, doesn't it, and so on, and saying, well, if you want us to respond to you within, 2 hours or so, or if you want this thing done in such a ridiculous timescale that it's going to require a whole team working on it continuously, we might not have the flexibility of where the work goes or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and customers are receptive to that in your experience?
I think so.
Yeah.
My personal experience is if a law firm phones me up and they say, look, is there any way you could help us out this weekend and do this thing for us because someone's let us down?
Yeah.
If I say, well, I suppose I could, but it's difficult, would
Yeah.
this be all right, being a premium? They go, thank you, you're a lifesaver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, lawyers' clients would say exactly the
Yeah.
same. And yet,
Yeah.
because it's done over the weekend away from the office, maybe
Yeah.
the lawyer doesn't fully record their time and the client gets a discount.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Indeed.
nuts. It's nuts.
Especially when there are bonuses riding on matter-related chargeable hours or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that part of the industry will change as well, value add rather than necessarily just hours produced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we are.
No, it's interesting.
Well, that's been fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to learn there for people. So get your time recording policies done, implement the policies, be confident in your fees, make sure you scope the job properly without rushing into the price. I think those are the main takeaways for me.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, where can people find you if they want to get hold of you and get some of this advice themselves?
If they put my name or business name Taylor Mowbray into any
They
search
should be able to
engine,
find you.
it's top of the list, you'd find
There we
me.
go,
But
then.
Taylor Mowbray is the business name. So,
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.
That's great.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
No, thank you
welcome.
very much for coming in and talking to us. It's been it's good to get some experts on the thing rather than us.
Rather
just
than you
talking.
and I just
yeah,
ranting about
exactly.
it. Yeah,
Just ranting about it. Yes.
Brilliant.
No, so thank you for that. So we call that a day.
Yeah.
We're potentially have a bit of a gap in the next couple of episodes because we're going to a couple of events and things like that. So
Yeah.
we may have to step back for a couple of times, but we'll definitely be back again before this side of Christmas as well, and maybe cover some more of the LPM stuff.
Absolutely.
in some
Yeah.
later
There's
episodes.
a lot in there, isn't there?
Loads of stuff to digest, and
Yeah. We'll have to write it up.
we'll see if we come back for some more advice as well at some
Well,
point.
thanks for inviting me. It's been a
Pleasure.
pleasure.
No, it's great. Thank you very
Thanks.
much. That's right.